Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session for Gemini Academy, where we will be looking at the research life cycle with Google AI. I am here with my colleague Steve, and so Steve is going to introduce himself for everyone, and then I'll introduce myself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm head of training at Canopy and a Google certified trainer. I've worked across the education piece for coming on for 20 years now, more recently doing some work with Louise, looking at HE, and also at the K-12 area as well.
Yeah, I can vouch for Steve. He's a wonderful trainer. So I am Louise. I'm head of higher ed at Canopy. So I'm responsible for all of our higher ed things and strategy. I'm also a lecturer, and I'm also a module author at a university as well, currently looking at the use of AI in the creative industries. So I feel like you're going to be well taken care of by both me and Steve today. So we've got lots and lots of things to show you today. So we're going to have a look at Google AI tools. It's going to be quite a busy session, but I just want to reassure you that everything we show you, we're going to give you to take away, including the demos and things like that. So you'll be able to take them away afterwards and sort of have a go and use those tools yourself. So then we're going to look at using AI as an ethical researcher. I have lots of experience taking students through things like literature reviews as well. So we're going to look at using Gemini as your research assistant and supporting the literature review. And then Steve's going to take you through some NotebookLM things, looking at sources, managing sources and creating figures. And then we've got a really exciting gem to show you, which can be used to support your writing. So lots and lots of things to show you. We're going to take a little break in the middle because people always have questions in these sessions, and rather than try and squeeze all the questions in right at the end, we like to do some questions in the middle and at the end as well. So we will do a little comfort break in the middle, but me and Steve will stay on to answer any questions. So throughout this, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them for you. So I'm going to hand over to Steve now, who's going to talk you through a little bit about AI.
So AI is really starting to appear in all aspects of our lives. And so I thought it might be a good opportunity just at the start now to just start collaborating a little bit. And in the chat, if you just drop in where AI is already powering areas of your digital life. And this can be your work life. This can be your life away from work. How is AI starting to appear and how is AI starting to support you? So for example, you may have noticed now frequently when you do a Google search, the first hit is generated by Gemini. And hopefully you're finding that that's a useful experience. It's saving you some time and it's providing you with some really high quality synthesized information very early on in your search process. So hopefully you're starting to see those benefits across a number of different areas. So if we just take a moment and drop into the chat any areas where we are seeing that, and we're going to keep an eye on the chat as we move through today's session. So I'll just give you a moment there. Excellent. I've just seen a suggestion there about accessibility. AI can be such a boost for accessibility in so many different ways. It really can break down some barriers and some boundaries that we might have previously had. What else are we saying? Yeah, operational responsibilities, helping you move through different processes until you're comfortable with the output. As a thought partner and things like that, really useful. Helping you sort of go through that ideation process and just sort of having a critical friend sometimes to bounce off, provided that you're prompting it in the right way and you're providing it with the correct sources to support that process. So as we were thinking about there, we're quite clear that AI is really coming on at pace, and it's really changing how we interact with so many aspects of the world. And it might also be making us think about who we are interacting with. Is it actually a human being on the other side, or is it an AI agent? So we're searching using AI, we're creating using AI, and so we can take an image and modify it, and we can create a brand new product from scratch. So one of the AI products that my children love is using Gemini to create storybooks. Now, when I think back to my youth, I maybe got a personalized storybook at Christmas, and the personalization was quite basic. It was maybe limited to my name and maybe my hair color. Whereas now we can feed so much information into Gemini about what my children look like, what their grandparents look like, and what their likes and dislikes are, that finished product is so much more personal to them. And they really love the stories that it comes up with. It's changing how we write. We talked a little bit about accessibility before, and we can look at how we write from an accessibility standpoint in so many different ways. So there are times where we might want to simplify some writing. We might have a particular reading age that we're aiming for. We might want to take something and maybe elaborate on it and then edit it a little bit further. We might even want to communicate with people who don't necessarily share the same language as us. And so again, using AI can really be powerful in that space. Or maybe we're just not very good at spelling, and AI can help us with some more accurate spelling suggestions and grammatical changes. And fundamentally, it is changing how we learn, and how we learn has had many changes as over the ages, and as media has started to support learning, and we've seen lots of young people now relying on YouTube videos rather than written content if they need to learn something, a skill or how to do something. But we're also now seeing AI becoming that sort of first port of call, rather than more traditional places for asking those questions and for engaging with that world of learning. Now, it's quite an interesting quote from Kent Walker. This is, AI is simultaneously revolutionary and something that's been quietly helping us for years. And actually, this path to AI is a well-trodden path. It feels cutting edge, and we're starting to see so many benefits. You might jump in your car and have Gemini available to you whilst you're driving along. You might have a smart speaker at home that you're able to talk to using natural English. But actually, some of those things we've had around for a while. I've had smart speakers in my home predating this kind of AI era. But actually, they are powered by various different forms of artificial intelligence that we, as a race, have been developing over many, many years. So whilst we are looking at the cutting edge of what AI can do for us right now, it's important to recognize that this hasn't appeared from nowhere. It hasn't just been created overnight, and an awful lot of research and an awful lot of principles have gone into building these platforms that we now have such amazing levels of access to. So we know where AI fits into our daily lives, but actually sometimes defining AI can be a little bit challenging. So if we go back to a fundamental definition, AI is the science of teaching machines to mimic intelligent human behaviors. And in fact, one of the key tests for AI was entirely based on whether a computer could adequately fool a human being into thinking they were communicating with another human being, the Turing test. And so actually, if we go all the way back to 1956, the Dartmouth Conference brought together scientists to discover AI. And we can consider this the founding event of AI as an academic discipline. So compared to many academic disciplines, it is still in its infancy, but it's probably more established than many people might believe. And actually, it's not a field in its own right. It's a very interdisciplinary field. It's combining computer science with so many other disciplines. And we're thinking about that key test of, can a human interact with AI and be tricked into thinking it is a human? That involves an awful lot of other academic fields following into that process to allow that to happen. So we've been looking at AI for decades, and we've been building constantly. We've made some major breakthroughs in the last few years, but they're standing on the shoulders of all the work that has gone in over several generations prior to this. And the actual term itself is attributed to Professor John McCarthy, who convened that Dartmouth conference. And back in the 50s, we were using it to describe logic systems. We had no real concept at that time of where we were going to end up. And in many ways, as with all technology, we have no real concept of where we're going to end up even in 10, 15 years from now. So the future is definitely less than fully mapped out. So if we go back to the stages of AI, we can clearly sort of break it down into 3 key areas. And I remember as a university student first looking at things like machine learning and finding it quite a challenging concept. And this was before we were even considering things like generative AI and the possibilities that it can do 20 to 30 years on from that. But machine learning was really, it was the infancy in some ways, but it was training systems to learn independently so that human beings were having to do less, but able to then do more with those systems, getting the computers to do the heavy lifting for us. And then on top of that machine learning, we then have large language models, LLMs, and they're designed to understand language patterns and generate responses so that the computer can communicate with us in a more human-friendly manner and can understand us in a more human-friendly manner. And I always think back to when I was teaching in secondary schools in the UK, teaching computer science, teaching students to program, and actually that thinking like a computer was probably the most challenging part of it. And now we can see that actually we can generate code without even having to think like the computer, without even having to think in code. We can just speak in natural language. And because of the work done on LLMs, the computer can understand what we want and can have a very, very good go at getting it right first shot with some minor editing. And then on the top of that, we have now generative AI, which can create new content based on the content that it's been trained upon. So the more content that is fed into that system, the better the quality of the output of that system will be. And in fact, that's true of all AI, that it relies on that input data and the quality of that input data being really, really high in order for it to be as effective as it is. And so now we can see that we can interact with AI using chatbots. And we can talk away to a chatbot, and sometimes we might detect some errors and we might need to actively check the accuracy of that, acting as the human in the loop. And that might be a concept that we kind of come back to more than once. But actually, then we can also start to use it in a more multimodal manner. So Gemini acts in a multimodal manner. So you can give it a range of different products. You can give it a video and then ask it to provide captions if that video doesn't have inbuilt captions. And we know now that a large percentage of young people always watch YouTube with the captions turned on. So being able to generate those captions really nicely and easily for any videos that we might want them to watch could also be really beneficial, again, in terms of accessibility. And that leads me nicely on to Project Astra. So we'll just give this video a go. Hopefully it's going to play.
I'm here with the latest research prototype of Project Astra, and we're going to see how it can help me fix my bike. Hey, go online and look for a user's manual for a Huffy mountain bike.
I have found a user manual for you. What would you like to know about it?
Okay, cool. Now scroll until you find the section about the brakes.
Sure thing. Looking for that page now.
I think I stripped this screw. Can you go on YouTube and find a video for how to fix that?
Of course. I'm opening YouTube now. This looks like a good video.
Place a rubber band over the head of the screw.
Oh, nice.
Press down firmly.
Can you go through my emails with the bike shop and find which size hex nut I need?
Sure. According to the email from Bicycle Habitat, you need a 3/8" hex nut for your sprocket. I've highlighted the correct bin for you.
It seems like I need a spare tension screw. Can you call the nearest bike shop and see what they have in stock?
Yep. Calling them now. I'll get back to you with what they have in stock.
I think my brake pads are wearing down. Can you check the manual again and see if it talks about them anywhere?
According to the manual, if you look on page 24...
Do you want to get lunch?
Yeah, give me 5 minutes. Can you finish what you were saying?
As I was saying, if you look on page 24, section 2, you'll see how to replace the brake pads.
Hey, any updates on that call?
Yep, I just got off of the bike shop. They confirmed they have your tension screw in stock. Would you like me to place a pickup order?
Could you show me some examples of dog baskets I can put on my bike?
Sure, I can help you with that. Just give me a moment. Here are some options. I think Zuka would look really great in these.
So we can see the power of AI, and actually I think the power of AI for me there, the lesson I could take from that is that I could save a fortune just by using Gemini more and contacting my local bike shop less to do routine maintenance on my bike. So I've learned something today that's caused me to think. But it's important to remember that AI is not a replacement. It's a partner that is going to enable better use of human expertise. So it's using human expertise and it's providing that link between human expertise and the person needing it, hopefully giving us greater focus, greater capacity, and greater insights into that information. So with Gemini in Workspace, it's beautifully integrated into the platform. And so it's so heavily integrated into the tools that we use every day that really it makes using Gemini absolutely seamless. Referencing content from Drive and files that we might have open to easily interrogate them and ask questions, and using it across the entire suite of products in so many different useful and creative ways. But all of this comes down to the 7 ethical principles that guide Google's AI development. And these were principles established in 2018. Google being one of the first companies to establish AI principles. So well before we'd even thought of the term Gemini, the brand Gemini, Google was already thinking, what's next? What do we need to be thinking about as we are developing this technology? And so we want it to be socially beneficial. We want it to avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. And that's incredibly important when we think about the data that it's being trained on, and we think about the historical nature of some of that data, some of that data reinforcing traditional biases in society. We want it to be built and tested for safety, which is absolutely critical, particularly when we're using it with young people. We want it to be accountable to people, incorporate privacy design principles. So when I'm using Gemini in my work account, it can only access the files that I've got access to. It can't access any other users' files. Upholding high standards of scientific excellence and being made available for users that accord with these principles. So right from day one, in Google's journey towards building this amazing platform, it's been thinking about the principles that underlie it. So rather than having to kind of go back and fold new principles in, it's been developed in line with these principles so that it's fully compatible with these principles, and we can be confident when we are using it as a platform that it is underpinned by this common sense approach. Now, how AI can apply to higher education today? Well, it kind of falls into 2 strands. We can look at how it can help faculty and staff, and we can look at how it can assist with making learning happen. So if we think about assisting faculty and staff, we're thinking about things like evidence-based learning. So using deep research, acting as a bridge between high-level academic theory and classroom practice, and doing a lot of that synthesis work for us. And again, we're going to check it, and we're going to check the sources that it's using, but it's hopefully going to do some of the heavy lifting for us to help us then have more time to spend on other areas that only humans can do. And that's that be more productive piece. It's a really powerful AI assistant, and the more time it gives me back, the more other things I can do to fill that time. Now, some of that might be that I'm just a little bit less busy and a little bit less stressed, and that would be great. But some of it is also going to have an impact on the quality of my work and what I can do in a given period of time. So the fact that I can quickly draft some course materials and some discussion questions. Yes, I might need to edit them, but I haven't had to come up with them from scratch. I've got a nice baseline that I can then work with. And we're working more securely. So where we've been talking about AI existing for a long time, Google's actually been using AI to our benefit for a long time. So things like Google's amazing anti-spam technology is based on all of those AI breakthroughs that have happened to date. So if you may ever use another platform other than Gmail for your email, you may notice that you either get a lot of spam or you've got some kind of additional product protecting you from spam. But commonly when using Gmail, you don't need anything like that because Google has it built into the platform using this technology seamlessly in the background to protect you. And then if we look at making learning, we obviously talked about accessibility, and we've talked about accessibility several times already today. We'll probably talk about it several more. But being able to give that on-demand support and meeting learners where we find them and immediately, so they can interrogate Gemini and ask Gemini questions ready to answer their questions straight away. We've got AI built into Chromebooks and other Chrome OS devices in terms of advanced text-to-speech, dictation, closed captions, using Chrome Vox to generate descriptive text for unlabeled images, things like that. Really, really powerful game changer if you need that technology. And then we've got tools such as guided learning, which again, rather than giving us the answer, is going to take us on that learning journey and try and help us understand the content and respond to gaps in our understanding of that content. So we've got a couple of examples here of where they've been used in a higher education setting. So Gemini and NotebookLM being used by the University of Oxford. So things like rapid literature reviews for book proposals and grant applications, uploading entire code folders for code review and optimization. And really, again, we're looking at Gemini with that long context window. So although it might disappear off the top of our screen, it's still remembering that content. It's got a very long context window. So information you told it several hours ago, it's still able to remember it and reference it. Taking handwritten lab notes into structured experiment and protocols, and taking lots and lots of documents and then forming some structured data using NotebookLM. So following a pilot program at Oxford, 85% of survey respondents reported increased productivity, and the university has made Gemini for Education and NotebookLM available to all staff and students through its secure Google Workspace platform. So everybody is benefiting from the fruits of that pilot. And then, and apologies if I mispronounce the name of this institution, but Komazua University have also been using Google NotebookLM and Gemini to accelerate their research and simplify some very complex research guidelines for faculty members. So one thing that NotebookLM is really good at is summarizing really long documents. And if you imagine being a new member of staff to that institution, every institution has different requirements, having to understand all of them quite quickly could be quite challenging. But if you can get a nice summary, then really, really beneficial. And they've actually rolled out AI Pro to faculty members, with 65.5% of staff reporting a time reduction through the introduction of AI, and 80% reporting an improvement in the quality of their work. So again, we're seeing that these strategies are helping them where previously those operational efficiencies might have been perceived to be impossible. So creating a 24/7 research guide from an 80-page manual or something like that, really, really quickly, we can generate that content. Yes, acting as the human in the loop, we're going to check it, but we can do things that previously we didn't think were possible. So I think we've got a few discussion questions here. So again, we're just going to take a few minutes, and using the chat, if you'd like to engage with one or more of the questions on screen. So how would you want to use generative AI in your role? How could undisclosed or invisible AI cause ethical, accountability, or academic integrity issues? Or what does your institution's policy say about using AI in your work? Because again, every organization, every institution is different. Having that understanding of what you are allowed to do and what you shouldn't be doing is obviously a really beneficial thing. So we're just going to take a few minutes, if you use the chat, to just respond to one or more of those, please.
So I'm going to now move on to discuss how we can use Google AI as an ethical researcher. And when I use the term ethical researcher, I'm talking about the individual sort of human in the loop in regards to using Google AI in an ethical way. And in the spirit of higher education and sharing knowledge, I thought I would do a bit of a knowledge share. So within the life cycle of sort of higher ed, there are 6, I'm going to say, very broad categories. If anyone has ever done research in an academic setting, you will know that this is a very basic overview of sort of the research life cycle. So I am not saying that research is this simple, nor that it is quick, but this is a very broad overview of the research life cycle. So you have ideation and hypothesis, literature review, data collection and management, data analysis and interpretation, writing and drafting, and verification and ethics. That circle goes backwards and forwards if you are me as well, because I never do anything in a linear way. But in regards to this, lots of people are now using AI in all of these steps of a research life cycle. And within this, we need to look at how we do this in an ethical way to make sure that we're upholding academic integrity standards. And so with that, I've got some academic integrity principles that I would like to share. Please be reassured that you will get this resource afterwards, so you don't need to take a picture of the screen, but just to go over them. Authorship responsibility. So AI can't be listed as an author. And this is really interesting. In the beginning, I was talking about AI is being used in the creative industries. This is also happening in lots of industries where they're saying AI cannot be listed as an author or a performer or things like that. But in academia, it's really important that we do that, because it means that we have to take accountability of what we're putting out there in regards to research, especially when research is shared and then cited elsewhere. Transparency and disclosure. This is a big one, and I feel like this is going to be ongoing as a conversation for a while, but acknowledging where you have used AI in your research. So if you have used Gemini for writing or editing, then making sure you are saying that and citing it. Originality and care. Research should be about new knowledge. And like we said, we're going to look at literature reviews later and looking at sort of like identifying gaps in knowledge, but it should be new. It shouldn't be re-synthesizing existing generated content, which, you know, AI does very well. It should be new knowledge, so that it's about that human in the loop. We always need people who are bringing new knowledge into our fields. It's what, you know, it's what research and things are all about. Bias mitigation. I'm going to talk about this a bit more. I always think that this is a big scary word, and when I introduce this to students, they're actually really scared of it. But I'm like, we all have bias, it's fine, but we just need to mitigate it and recognize it. But AI is trained on a lot of human data. Humans have biases. It's not an inherently bad thing, but we do need to recognize it, because we could reinforce those. And then preventing plagiarism. So if you're not citing AI use or anything like that, it can be seen as a form of plagiarism. So making sure that your research narrative is driven by your original human-based thinking. I would also like to propose that there might be things missing from this list. And so I would welcome you to say if you think that anything is missing. It's not perfect. I think as AI changes, these principles will change and they will become bigger. Things might disappear, things might come in. And as we all know in education, things do go in cycles. So someone might bring a new one in that's actually just one of them, but it's called something else. And so academic principles are really, really important. And I think in regards to any form of research at whatever point you are, it's really good to even have your own almost manifesto of how you're approaching your use of AI, and just making sure that that's sort of flexible. Also, lots of universities are moving away from the word policy and are introducing principles. Principles are more flexible, and policies can be more set in stone. As AI changes so quickly, it can be difficult to keep up with ever-changing policies. And so I know that the Russell Group in the UK are using principles over policy. So that's a really interesting sort of area of dialogue. So we're going to give these to you, but there is lots of guidelines coming out around ethical use of AI in research and education. So just to say, there are lots of resources you can go to sort of see what the emerging consensus is. And I think if you are working in higher ed and academia, it's really, really important to keep an eye on this. I was also recently looking at sort of academic journals, and they're bringing out their own policies around what can be submitted and things like that. And really interestingly, lots of them are saying that you can use AI to support your writing. And I feel like that is such a significant change from where we were even like a year ago, 2 years ago. It used to be like you can never use it for your writing, and already that's changing. We're also going to use these documents a bit later in a demo, so you'll be able to really sort of get stuck in again. We will give these to you, so please don't worry. We're not just going to flash them and take them away. We've got them all for you as open links, so please sit tight. So bias and fairness, I'm just going to talk about this a little bit more because I think this is important if you're like a student facing in higher ed, or you're academic facing, or you're operational. But it's really, really important that we're analysing AI for potential biases. Like I said, it's reflected in the training data. It is not inherently like a really bad or negative thing. And I think we really need to move away from that, because then people hide their use of it because they're concerned about this. And we want to promote ethical and transparent use of AI tools. So how can you address bias? So I think these are things that I do all the time when I'm working with AI, but I also give them to my students now. I'm like, I do not mind if you use it. I just really want you to think critically about your outputs and what you're getting for it. But I think the main one that I really want to sort of emphasize is just greater transparency and accountability around AI from faculty and students. I think there's sometimes a bit of a tension where people are using it but not being completely transparent. But even little things like putting a little like graphic on your slides or your resources if you've used AI within your process. I've started doing that with students and they really, really like it. And so I think there's lots of ways we can address bias and transparency, but it's just like sort of letting people know that, yes, I have used AI in this. So if you have a question about it, I might be able to answer that question for you, but it might involve me talking to you about my AI outputs and things like that. So there's lots and lots of ways we can address bias. And I think practice what you preach. If you do this, then it sort of just imparts onto your colleagues and your students and your staff, and everyone's just much happier. One thing to do as well and recognise is that Gemini does have limitations. It won't always generate accurate responses. It can also make, and I find this, that if you are using it for tools like deep research, or if you're using NotebookLM, if you give it lots of information, it can make quite big leaps in knowledge. It's trying to sort of plug the knowledge that is missing. And so again, really, really important to recognise it and sort of analyse and evaluate the outputs that it's giving you, because it sometimes does make things up. But I think if I've been finding the more, as I use it, it gets confused if you're not giving it clear prompts and things like that. And in our last session, we spoke about prompting. So if you were there and you have that prompting gem, looking at how to write an effective prompt can be a really good way to sort of alleviate this. But again, if you're thinking about AI literacy and transparency, this is a really good thing to always keep in mind. And just to go over 3 ways that chatbots can generate inaccurate information. So they can invent facts. Sometimes I think it's quite a good activity to try and get it to do that and show students and say, it's making things up because I'm not asking it the right questions. But it's trying to fill in the gaps. It's trying to be helpful. It's not doing it to sort of sabotage your research or your academic integrity. And like I said, it can make unsupported leaps between points and things like that. But again, interrogate it, ask it, is that accurate? And then it will tell you. And then make sure that you're looking at other sources to sort of back up what you're doing, especially in the research lifecycle. And again, it can make fake citations. This is funny because you can ask it to make you fake citations as well. If you needed an example of like a fake document, you can ask it to do that, but it can sometimes make up citations as well, especially if you're giving it information. You might give it something and it might get confused and then it will give you the wrong output. So it might not necessarily be fake, but it might be incorrect, or it might be the wrong year, and things like that. So again, being mindful of how we're using it in the research life cycle, because this is also intrinsically linked to academic integrity. And I use the term academic honesty with my students as well now, because that sounds less scary than integrity. But academic honesty is a nice lens to look through this, is are we being honest and have we interrogated it and things like that. And a really lovely framework that you can use and sort of take away with you is the AAA framework. So is it accurate? Is it aligned? And is it appropriate? Again, I introduce this to students and faculty. So for example, in our course writing, we are using AI in our course writing now. We are giving it our writing and we're asking it to refine it, but we're making sure, you know, is it even aligned to our module writing guide? And we're making sure that it is. So this is a really lovely, simple, and it's nice, isn't it? AAA, it sounds quite nice. It sort of rolls off quite nicely. And again, we want you to sort of take this knowledge and share it amongst your teams. That's what it's for. But again, there might be a step missing. You might want to add another A or an A, B, C, and we welcome you to do that. But just making sure that it aligns with the needs of your institution and your students. So it's a really lovely framework to sort of take away. And like I said, you will get this resource afterwards, so you can take this. Now, in research is so precious, and sort of it is the backbone of a lot of universities, and we want to make sure that our research is kept precious because it's sort of the backbone of what we do. And so I would, when you're doing research, you can collect a lot of data about humans or groups of people. And so I think when you are using AI chatbots or you're using AI tools, another thing to make sure that you're being really careful with, again, for integrity and honesty, is have you removed personal information? Or when you're collecting that information, have something in there telling the people and the participants that you're going to be using AI to support your research, so that you've got that consent there from the beginning. But is it minimized? You know, if you're using initials or like letters to assign to humans, can it be sort of linked back to them? But are you using like minimum data necessity for the purpose that you're doing it for? And can it be reverse engineered? I always think this is a really interesting concept to introduce to students about what that actually means. But can your data be de-anonymized? Because a lot of the time I'll see students putting things in and I'm like, I could easily know exactly what you are talking about there, and you're sort of leaking your own research into the chatbot. So just be very, very careful. But again, this and the AAA framework are sort of integral to keeping that sort of academic integrity in place, or academic honesty, or academic misconduct, or whatever term you want to use at your institution. It always differs. And again, we are focusing on sort of the research life cycle today, but students do research and faculty do research. We all do research in higher ed. But we can always remind students, I think do this right from the beginning, but remind them consistently throughout their studies, is that just remember AI is not human. Even though you can build it now to speak to you like a critical friend, it still isn't. So it shouldn't be making decisions for you, and it shouldn't be replacing tutors. It shouldn't be replacing library staff who are just, library staff, my absolute favorite. I'm like, always go to the library staff when one of my students need help. If there's any librarians in the room, big shout out to you. But we're not saying that it's used to replace anyone in this space. Even if it's really good at sort of picking up those patterns and things, it's not a human, and you should always be seeking out sort of other opinions from colleagues and staff and students. The AI should enhance skills and not substitute them. I won't talk about this because I could talk about it for hours, but in regards to writing, I think that's going to become a massive topic point in regards to sort of switching it, where we can sort of use it to sort of refine our writing, but really the thinking should come from us still, and the human and the ideas and the brainstorming. But make sure you're also synthesizing your own information and things like that. Always critically evaluate AI outputs. I feel like this is one thing that everyone just needs to promote, and people will get more comfortable. But AI can make mistakes, and I think if you're a lecturer and you've marked student work, you will always notice when a student has not sort of evaluated their output, because they can say nothing for like 3 paragraphs, and you're like, you're not telling me anything. But just like just really sort of making them feel safe so that they can sort of critique it, and showing them how to critique it using those frameworks we've just been over. So if you are students, you know, you've got to critique your output. We've got to teach them how to do that with these frameworks, and not just tell them how to do it. So that's why sessions like this can be really valuable and important. Keep your private information private, and make sure you're accessing training and tools for students. AI moves quickly, it changes. Google have amazing training and certifications for both students and staff, and we'll show you those later. Yeah, it's integral, I think, to make sure that you're keeping your students and your staff up to date, because there's a big assumption that everyone knows how to use it, but I would say that that assumption is incorrect, but that bias does exist. So, a few more discussion questions before we move on. And if you want to share in the chat, that would be lovely. You don't have to take part in the discussion questions, but it's always really nice to hear sort of what's going on within the higher education space. If you've got any questions for me or Steve as well, you can also ask us questions as we're going through this. I love a good sharing knowledge session, although we can't spend all of these 2 hours chatting, but we can chat a bit in the chat space. And then I'm going to hand back over to Steve, who is going to show you through how you can use Gemini as a research assistant. I'll just leave this on the screen for like 30 more seconds and then we'll move on. Right, Steve, over to you for the next bit.
Thank you very much. So, as we've been discussing and mentioning more than once already, it's always important to trust but verify and act as that human in the loop. So this analogy of Gemini being a helpful, inexperienced research assistant is quite a good working analogy to treat it as such. It's really, really keen to please, but it has to have clear instructions and information in order to do a good job. So sometimes it will go off on a tangent, and it doesn't always have the knowledge that it needs to do that good job. And it's up to us to provide as much information and context as we can realistically do to be able to allow it to do that job well. So if we think about, again, being that inexperienced research assistant, if we ask that person, if it was a real person, to do a task, the way that we could help structure that task so that they could be successful is to show them previous similar tasks that we've done, is to maybe curate some of the sources that they're using to feed into those tasks, rather than just saying, go off and do this with very minimal levels of input. And if we behave in that way when we're using Gemini, we will get far better quality responses from Gemini. And then when we're reviewing them, we may make the odd tweak, but we're unlikely to have great issues with the quality of it. And we can also do things like asking Gemini to ask us questions when it gets to key decision points, if it doesn't have the information that it needs, rather than wanting it to infer something or to just guess. We're going to ask it to say, I don't have all the information I need on this area. I'm just going to stop here, ask you a question, and then I'll proceed. And again, that's quite a useful way of working more closely with Gemini. So for those of you who haven't used Gemini before, it's just a quick opportunity to take a look at its user interface. And we will take a little bit more time to look at this slightly later as we delve into deep dives. When you first arrive in Gemini, if you're in a Gemini for Education account, it will know your name because you're logged in. And it will allow you to write a prompt for Gemini, but there are other things that you can do. So you can give it access to files and other resources. You can ask it to work using particular tools. Now, some of those tools, it will infer that you want it to use them. So if you start to talk to it about creating images, it will turn Nano Banana on automatically for you. But some of those tools are less clear, like Canvas. It doesn't generally turn Canvas on automatically. You have to turn it on manually. And some of the newer tools like Lyria 3, making music for you, it doesn't yet understand from prompts. If you say, create me a song, and you don't turn Lyria 3 on in the tools menu, it might make you the lyrics, but it's not going to create you that lovely MP3 file that you actually wanted to stick at the start of the slide deck, for example. So those tools there, it's a good idea to have a little bit of a play about with all of them if you've never used them before, just to understand what they do. And then additionally, over to the right-hand side of the tools menu, you've also got the ability to change the model that you're using. So by default, you'll be using fast, and the clue is in the name. It will give you fast responses. If a particular task isn't going so well in fast, or you think it's more challenging, you can switch it to thinking. But it's important to recognize that thinking is far slower, and it does consume tokens. So you haven't, in most cases, got unlimited use of thinking. So it's a more targeted approach when using thinking. And the same is true of using Pro. If you're doing anything mathematical, you've got the option to put it into those modes. And then, of course, if you want to, rather than typing into Gemini, you can hit the little microphone button and speak into Gemini. So this is the user interface, and this is in light mode. So I will just also recognize that when I do my demos, I prefer to use dark mode. I just feel that it fits me a little bit better. I think Louise also uses dark mode, but you can control that in the little cog in the bottom left corner of Gemini if you prefer one or the other, or you switch depending on the time of day and things like that. You can control the user interface in that regard. So we're going to be looking now, just ahead of our break, at 6 features that can improve our research collaboration with Gemini. So we're going to be looking at these 6 features, and we're just going to take a brief step into each one. Now, Gemini will cite things for us. And as Louise touched on earlier, it's important to check those citations. So because it's really keen and eager to help, it may occasionally mislead you with something where you think, oh, that's a brilliant quote, I'm going to use that. And then when you actually drill down into it, it's not quite right, or you ask it, where did you find that? And it can't actually point you to a trustworthy source. So again, it's acting as the human in the loop, using your information and knowledge. And the more you ask Gemini to cite and click through and view the citations, the better it is. Now, particularly if you're working with documents that you've uploaded, it will cite you back to parts of the document. But again, it's worth just verifying that it's not leading you into a false sense of security by giving you lots and lots of citations that actually all go to the same place, and it's a really untrustworthy source. So always good to look at the citations. We know this anyway. This is not an AI specific theme. We're going to be grounded in citations in any case. And then what we can also do is we can, alongside our text-based prompts, we can upload images and videos. And again, we can ask it to summarize them. We can ask it to provide alt text for us. And if you're not familiar with alt text is text that describes an image, and it can be used by screen readers. If a blind person is interacting with a website and an image doesn't have alt text, before the era of AI, their screen reader would just say there's an image. It couldn't describe the image. Now with alt text embedded in the image, it will read the alt text description, and with more advanced screen readers, if there isn't, it will use AI to try and interpret what the image is, to try and give that explanation to someone who can't see the image. So whether you want to synthesize lots of different products, and they might be multimodal, whether you want a quick way of explaining a particular diagram, or whether you've got a video that hasn't been captioned and you want Gemini to caption it for you. As we mentioned before, lots of young people prefer to watch videos with captions turned on. Gemini's got you covered. If you can think it, you can probably put it into Gemini, and then of course you can ask it to take a whole load of text and make you a diagram, or take a video and summarize that video, so that learners who maybe don't want to engage with the video can just read that text-based summary instead. So again, acting as a human in the loop, what's appropriate for your context. And then if we're working using a mobile device, particularly, this idea of going live with Gemini, and Gemini being able to see what we can see. And you might have seen the Gemini advert where they're near King's Cross Station in London, and they ask Gemini, where am I? And it immediately says, it looks like you're in the King's Cross region of London. And it's really instantaneously coming back. And it's quite incredible that we are so connected from these mobile devices that Gemini can so quickly interrogate the image that it's seeing. So it's brilliant when you're multitasking, brilliant if you're on the go, out and about. You might be using it in your personal lives, and you might never have considered how you could use it in your academic and work lives. But taking a photograph of the diagram on a whiteboard and things like that, and again asking it to summarize or solve an equation for you, really, really useful. And again, you've got an awful lot of control. So you've got different voices, so you can personalize this experience. And again, if you're on the go, just chatting away to Gemini rather than having to sit and text on that limited keyboard might be a better way of interacting. So we're also able to look at prompt practices for best practices for creating images. So again, as we've been talking about already, the more detail we put into our prompt, the more thought we put into our prompt, the more likely we are to get the thing that's in our mind's eye. So if we can describe in as much detail as reasonably possible what's in our mind's eye, rather than just thinking that Gemini will guess and get it right, the more detail we can give it, the better. So if we can think when we're making an image of things like the lighting, the perspective, the focus and depth of field, the mood, the artistic style. Now, when we're making images, we're probably not going to have unlimited use of that tool. So each image that we make, if it's not quite right, does have an associated cost, insofar as we're not going to be able to make 1 million more of them until we get it right. So again, the more we think about these prompts, the more we structure them, the better we make them, and the quicker we get the product that we're looking for, and we can kind of work with and move on with our day. And again, if it's not quite right, a little tweak, Gemini will refresh the image to take accordance to that tweak. But the more we can put in at the start, the better. And again, if this is something that you find particularly challenging, it's a skill, and you will get better at it over time as you get more experience. So in the same way that lots of us are very good at finding information using Google search, we didn't get good overnight, for want of a better expression. We developed our skills over time, and we know that we probably have better skills than maybe the general public do. So if you ask a friend to go and search something for you, they maybe can't find it, but you can find it straight away because you've developed those skills. And it's the same with AI prompting. You'll develop those skills over time, and you will get better and better at your use of AI, following some of the strategies that we're talking about today, and we talked about 2 weeks ago as well. So just heading into an opportunity for a break, there's 3 discussion questions there. So which of Gemini's features are you most excited about exploring in your role? Which of Gemini's features do you have questions about? And how could Gemini how could we use Gemini as a research assistant to support our work? And if we have a think about those questions, maybe engage with one or two of them. We've got this short break just coming up, a comfort break, because it is a 2-hour session. So if you have a think about those questions, I'm going to move on to the next slide, because an important part of this webinar is that by attending the full webinar, you are able to gain a certification from it, and using the QR code or the bit.ly link there. And just to call it out, the bit.ly link is case sensitive. So where it's got the capital G, A, H, E, and C, you must put those capitals in, otherwise it won't work. This form, and I'll demonstrate this form in a moment, this form is going to ask you for some feedback. So you can't actually finalize this form until the end of the session, but if you then stick around for the full session, it will then email you a copy of the certificate with personalized with your name. And so when you access this form, it'll look like this. So obviously you are going to have to tick that box there to say you want it to record your details. Make sure that you've selected May 12th, because it does check the attendance sheet to make sure that you actually did attend the session. Go ahead and click next. And then it's going to ask you some questions. Now, one of the questions that you're going to need to answer yes or no to is this one here. And if you hit no, you won't get the certificate. So you hit yes, put in the name, the first name, and then the surname or family name or last name that you want on your certificate. When you then are able to hit submit at the end of the session, and you've given us a score out of 5 in these various different categories and some feedback, you will then subsequently receive a copy of the certificate. So we're just going to take an opportunity for a quick comfort break. I'll answer some questions that people might have at this point. I can see Louise is diligently posting away in the chat. So I'm just going to shut up for a few minutes, and please take an opportunity for a comfort break if you need it.
Just to say about referencing AI, the literature I always go through to is the Cite Them Right Referencing Guide by Bloomsbury. The thing I put in the chat is actually from the last one. They've updated it again. We're at the 13th edition of that now, but it's excellent, not just for AI, but for things like TikTok videos, YouTube videos, things that 15, 20 years ago were not being cited as often as they are now. Again, for knowledge share, quite a lot of my students will use TikTok videos as sources now and things like that, and things to reference to, because I work in the sort of creative industry sphere. So lots of their inspiration comes from those platforms, but it's a really excellent thing to get for both staff and students. And I'm absolutely sure that most university libraries will have those as ebooks or as physical books. But it's great. It's updated quite a lot. But that's what we want in this case in regards to referencing AI. But it's a wonderful, useful bit of writing and guidance, and I always put it in my students' induction if they have questions around citations and things like that, because we all know they're using Chrome extensions to do their citing for them anyway. So it's just making sure that they're using best practices when they're doing it. But yeah, it's called Cite Them Right by Bloomsbury. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them.
Just to answer that question about tokenization quotas, not specifically in terms of AI machine learning for robotics in medical sensors, but in terms of usage limits for Gemini. If I get a moment towards the end of the webinar, I will try and grab the guidance documentation that tells you what you get with the particular different tiers of accounts. So for example, if you are using a standard Google account, a personal Gmail account, your usage level, your token levels are far lower than even if you're using an education fundamentals free account. And then obviously if your organization subscribes to higher tier accounts, you get additional higher limits based on that subscription. But there is some documentation on this. Some of it is slightly opaque. It talks about higher usage than a standard account, for example, rather than saying exactly how many queries in a given period of time. But what I've also found is that where I have hit limitations with Gemini, it's pretty good at telling me, and also I found that the stand down time with Gemini is far shorter than with other products out there. I'm able to sort of resume using those tools far quicker if I do hit a limitation. And what I think is also important to call out is, in your initial usage of Gemini, you will probably act in a non-typical manner. So you will try lots and lots of tools, and that will place additional load on your Gemini account initially, because you're trying lots of things out that in your day-to-day life you probably wouldn't do. And therefore you find when you first start playing with Gemini, you maybe hit a few limits that you wouldn't normally hit, just because you're trying new things and there's some cool new features, and I want to try making a little MP3 music file or whatever it might be, that actually sort of day to day you maybe don't do that often. But I can certainly find the documentation on that towards the end of the webinar, and I'll paste the links into the chat, because I think it's actually across a couple of different links for that.
Can I answer the question about an individual providing prompts to make their AI sound more like them? It is impossible to prove, and there's a conversation around this at the moment within higher ed around how disclosures are just meaningless. So if you ask students to say, have you used it or not, in a basic way, if they say no, then you can't interrogate them anymore, even if you think that they have. I think we need to look at what we are assessing and what we are asking students to evidence in regards to learning. And there's lots of interesting things at the moment around voice first assessment and asking students not to talk in an academic prose and not trying to force their own voices into that structure right from the beginning, but allowing them to talk like themselves through vivas and presentations and spending more time with them in a setting. I think there's a conversation around, if we are not in controlled conditions with students, we do have no way of really knowing what they're using AI for, even if we do have guidelines and things like that. So I think I can't answer that question right now, but there is lots of dialogue happening at the moment around what are we actually trying to assess students and what do we want them to evidence, and was writing ever a good measure of learning, which is a very controversial question, but that is what's happening within Oxford and Cambridge, and lots of their academics are doing fascinating work in that area. There is a person called Kelly Webb Davies who is doing incredible work in regards to that space. I would recommend following her and then looking at her voice first assessment model, because I feel like that could be a real aspirational way to look at how we sort of tackle that hurdle. I don't have the answer yet, but it's something I'm really interested in. If you would like to talk about it further afterwards, I'm happy to. But I think as well, sometimes it's just making sure that it's a safe space for students to use AI right from the beginning, and then they won't be fearful of being honest when they've used it. And then also just asking them to articulate what they've written for you, and having those sort of vivas and conversations with your students. I know that's not suitable in every institution, but yeah, I think there's going to be a big shift in what we're asking students to do, but really interesting questions. Yes, I feel Gemini also is great at mimicking me in emails, but I think it's because I send a lot of emails and it's learned what I'm like. But I think, you know, it is about being honest about that with students and just sort of, yes, I will share a link. That is her profile, yeah. And all of her research is open source, so you can go have a look at it. It's called Voice First Assessment, but that's one solution, but it's great. I'd really recommend looking at that. She's done lots of work with Google as well. So sorry, Steve, shall we move on to the next bit? We're going to look at literature reviews. So I'm going to hand over to Steve to look at supporting the literature review. Before Steve begins, I just want to say that this is in the context of supporting the literature review. We are not advocating for this, you know, a replacement of the literature review. A literature review is a very human-led process. You're looking for gaps in knowledge. You're looking for what's happening within that sphere already, and sort of what your research could potentially bring to it. All of that needs to have that human in the loop from the very beginning. I would never recommend this replacing the literature review, because also you need to go and look at lots of a variety of sources. But just for that context, we're looking at supporting the literature review, not replacing it. Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Okay. At various different points, I'm going to attempt to live demo. There is no surer way for Gemini to have issues than for me to step up and say I'm going to live demo Gemini. So I do tend to, just because lots of you will probably train others, one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to pre-build some examples. Some of the techniques we're going to look at take time anyway, so you probably don't want to sit in silence whilst Gemini or NotebookLM builds something. So you will just have to take my assurance that what I'm showing you was actually built in accordance with the prompt that I'm telling you. And if Gemini does for any reason fail, it did work when we practiced it. So let's see how we get on. Okay, so obviously one of the key things that Gemini can give us is this deep research. Now, it says deep research in minutes. It is in minutes, but again, it's not the sort of thing that you would want to necessarily live demo exactly how long in minutes it was, because it's quite a lonely place standing on that stage waiting for Gemini to come back with something that you hope is going to be right. So again, pre-building is always good. But the beauty of deep research is that it's really structured, and we'll see that as we go through the example in a moment, that it will go so far and then it will come back to me and say, this is where I think I'm going. Am I going in the right direction? Do you want to change anything? And then I can commit to that deep research occurring. Deep research is limited, and again, I can share those details towards the end of the webinar. And again, it tends to be something that while you're trialing it out, you maybe do hit the limits sometimes, but in day-to-day usage, your usage is probably so focused that you're probably okay day to day. And we will take a look at this deep research process, but it acts as that autonomous research assistant, doing a lot of the really labor-intensive legwork. Obviously, you've got to act as the human in the loop. You've got to be checking it at the various different stages and checking its outputs. But whereas you would expect AI to be able to give you some immediate answers, this actually operates slightly differently, and it gives you that multi-step plan, browses the web for several minutes, referencing and cross-referencing different perspectives, trying to add that academic depth and rigor, and following that kind of graduate level researcher process of taking the complex query, breaking it down into sub-questions and research gaps, generating a research plan which you should review before you allow it to go off and conduct that research, going through over 100 sources, including academic repositories, news archives, technical white papers, all of that sort of thing, and evaluating the credibility of those sources, looking at their citations, resolving any conflicting data, and then giving you a multi-page report with inline citations. And again, you should be clicking through into those citations to make sure that you are QAing the work that has been done on your behalf. So when we use deep research, it does slow the process down, but it's by design because the amount of work that's being done on your behalf. And that's why, where I said before, you can ask Gemini to ask you questions when it gets stuck. And I actually quite like that approach. By design with deep research, it will ask you to verify that it's going along the right lines before it commits to the actual sort of real substance of the queries, because those queries do take time and they are so in depth. So how it works, you give it your prompt, and from the tools menu, you select deep research. Then it's going to build you a research plan. This takes a minute or two to build your research plan. And you should take this opportunity to review it and make some tweaks and some changes. The more you use this technology, the more you will learn how to prompt it and get things really close on that first shot. But the first few times you use it, you're probably going to have some problems, some gaps that you're going to need to address, and you want to address them now before you burn through a load of tokens conducting that deep research. So you're going to review that proposed research plan. Then you're going to hit start, and you can sit and watch in real time, or you can go off and do something else, even if that something else is just taking the time to grab a cup of coffee, which you might otherwise not have time to do. And hopefully by the time you've got back from grabbing that cup of coffee, Gemini's finished and you've got your comprehensive report that you can then look at. But what's more, you can ask Gemini further questions about it. So it's not just going to give you this report and say, there you go. You can ask it to do things like summarizing the report. You can, again, using it for accessibility reasons if you need to re-level text and things like that. So you've still got the full power of Gemini, but it's going to do an awful lot of this work for you, provided that you think carefully about what it is you want it to do. And then, of course, you've got that detailed report that you can then take out. Again, you might want to generate an audio overview, and we may look a little bit more at this as we go through the rest of the session. And you might want to download that. You might want to provide that to people. Again, it might be difficult to read on the go. It definitely is, but it's probably a lot easier to listen to something on the go. And in terms of a busy person, you're dashing off to the next lecture across campus. You maybe have time to stick your headphones in and listen as you walk, but you haven't got the time to sit at your desk and read it. So again, the multimodal nature can be really useful, even if you don't require it for accessibility reasons. So we're going to take a look at one or more of these deep research prompts. And what I'm going to endeavor to do is give you an opportunity to also try them. So whilst I will model them out for you, I will then come back to the slide deck to show you some of the other examples, so that you can then model them out for you. So I'm gonna come out of presentation mode because I actually need to be able to grab the prompt. And the prompt, you'll notice when I come across into Gemini. So here's my Gemini. Again, it knows me because I'm logged in. It's in dark mode.
Steve, we can't see it. You'll need to share your tab.
Sorry.
There we go.
So it knows me. I'm in dark mode. I've got my settings down here if I want to change the theme. So if I want it in light mode, I can change it. And I can paste my prompt in here. The tools menu is where I find deep research. If I don't select deep research, it won't go ahead and do the deep research. And you can see here that it's provided in the prompt that we're giving you some examples. You can customize those and put them into your own context. If you don't want to, you can simply edit the prompt before you hit go, and you can say that it's going to do it in the suggested areas rather than, and if you don't have a specific topic, you could just drop that area out, or you could just do a state-of-the-art audit. When you go ahead and click submit, it's then going to take you through that multi-stage process. So if I hit submit on that, you can see it's telling me what it's doing now. It's generating this research plan, and this will take a little bit of time for it to conduct this. So okay, that was relatively quick. So as you see, it's gonna tell me what it's going to do in quite a degree of detail. So it's going to take me a few minutes to read through this and just check I'm happy with it. But I then have this edit plan button, and so it's going to say, this is what the current plan is. What do I want to change? And if I make a change, it's then going to summarize it again and give me the option to start. If I go across to one I made earlier, on this occasion, I didn't edit the plan. It's the same prompt that we've just used, but because deep research takes time, I've pre-built this one. So I hit the start research button. It went ahead and conducted the research, and it gave me this file here that you can see the level of detail to it. And I can export it to docs, I can copy it, and I can create other products based upon it. So if I wanted to make me a nice infographic to illustrate it, if I want to create an audio overview, I can ask it to produce another product off the back of this for me. It is important to remember that if you do lots of these deep research tasks, you will exhaust your ability to do deep research for a period of time. So when we go back to the slide deck, you might want to pick one or two just to try out, and just think carefully about how you're using it. Because if you then, after this webinar, want to go back and use it and you've used all your tokens, that might be quite frustrating. So don't just use the examples for the sake of it. Really have a think about the example that's sort of most relevant to your context, and maybe go with that one. So we'll go back to the slide deck. I'm going to hit slide show so it goes full screen. And I believe Louise is going to paste these into the chat window if she hasn't done so already. You've now got a few minutes to try those out, see if you can get it to produce you a little audio overview and things like that if we've got enough time. And we'll just pause for a few minutes there.
Just to add as well, these prompts use the parts framework, which is what we explored in the last session. And so even just as prompts, they're really good examples that you can show to faculty, students, staff around what an effective prompt can look like. It doesn't have to be incredibly long. It just has to be succinct to be effective. So if you were at the last session, this sort of links to that. So it's using the parts framework to sort of create and mold those prompts. And just on an accessibility thing, I always add to my deep research prompts what I want the output to be in regards to length, because I can't engage with very, very long reports. And if they give me a long report, I use audio overview, but you can also prompt it to give you a very, very specific output as well, because I'm not engaged well by like swathes of writing. So again, you can always ask it and say, you know, I want it to be written in this way, or I want it to be written in a conversational tone and things like that. And then you can use the audio overview to make it really tailored to your individual needs.
And just as a reminder, Louise, they will get a copy of the slide deck following this call as well. So again, if you find these prompts particularly useful, you will have them to refer back to. Right, I think at this point it might be wise to move on, because we've still got quite a bit to cover, and we also want to have an opportunity for any questions at the end. So I am going to move on, but obviously you're going to get the slide decks, so you will be able to go back through these if you find them really useful. So moving on, we know that managing sources is really, really important. And that actually it can be quite challenging with AI, and that's really where this next version of Google's AI suite comes into its own. So they're all underpinned by the same technology. LearnLM flows through both Gemini and Google NotebookLM, but NotebookLM treats the sources slightly differently to Gemini. But actually, depending on the task that you're doing, NotebookLM may be the more powerful tool available to you. But in any case, understanding what tools are available to you and being able to select the most appropriate one obviously has enormous value. So it's still going to be using that wonderful technology that underpins Gemini. So you are effectively still using Gemini, but it's solely grounded in the sources that you give it. So it cannot go out to the internet other than in the research phase where you are saying, I'm looking for sources. And if you are going out to the internet, it's wise, if you're using a website, to take it as a PDF, because it's then you've got a record of the date and time that you accessed that resource, because obviously we know websites are dynamic and can change. And so in terms of citing that source, being able to give the date and time is obviously beneficial. But once you've conducted that initial sort of trawl of what my sources are going to be, and you've allocated them into that notebook, it cannot go out beyond those sources. So if those sources do contain the answers to your questions, NotebookLM will come back to you and say, your sources don't contain the answers. Now, at that point, you can then adapt your sources. You can say, okay, I've missed a really important source out when I've been selecting them. That was my mistake. And you can go in and add additional sources at that point. Or you can think, maybe that question wasn't the best question. Maybe I need to phrase it differently, or maybe that train of thought wasn't really where I wanted to go. It's your opportunity then to take that path, whichever way it goes. So solely grounded in those sources, using that amazing technology, again, still being multimodal. We can feed into it audio files, we can feed into it video files, and we can also have it output lots of different formats as well. And we're going to take a look at that. So we're only using information from the sources that we provide, so it becomes a real expert. So you'll notice as we start to put the sources in, it has to examine the sources before it can do anything. If you give it really, really long sources, there may be a little pause at the start of using NotebookLM whilst it interrogates those sources and understands them before it's able to actually do anything. And once it has understood them, it will provide you with a little summary of what you've given it in the central pane, the chat pane. So you know at that point, okay, it's done. And we'll take a look at the user interface very shortly. But we can give it all kinds of different files. We can link out to PDFs. We can link to Google Docs, Google Slides. We can put into it a whole manner of different products. And it is also multilingual. So there might be products that you're putting into it that are in languages that you don't speak. It will be able to translate them for you and interrogate them in the exact same manner. So again, providing access to resources that we may not previously have had access to. And then we can do wonderful things over with the studio pane, like producing quick summaries and little podcasts and slide decks and things like that. So there's all manner of different products that we can produce in addition to being able to chat and interrogate those sources. So as we said, you create a notebook, you add sources in. There might be education standards, lecture notes, course recordings, whatever they might be. And it's going to automatically analyze those sources. So if it's an audio file, it may need to run it through some text-to-speech. So it'll take a moment to do that for you. And then it says you'll get an instant overview. It depends on the sources that you give it. If you give it a particularly long PDF, instant is going to be measured in a few minutes. If it's a one-page PDF, it may feel instantaneous. And then you can ask questions or request content to be generated based off those sources. And again, there are limitations, and I can provide details at the end of how many sources and how large the sources can be. And your initial temptation at this point might be to make a massive NotebookLM, a notebook that's got millions and millions of things in it. But actually, you dilute its effectiveness if you do that. What we tend to find is that actually one of the most effective notebook files is a notebook file that's only got one source, because it's really, really laser focused on that source. Similarly, there can be some very effective notebook files that have maybe 5 or 10 sources, but as you start to expand beyond that, you have to be very careful and think carefully about what it is you're trying to achieve and what it is you want to produce at the end, because there is a bit of a diminishing return on the more things you include. But you can have some quite weighty sources in there. It just depends, again, on your expertise and your experience as it develops with using NotebookLM. So far from saying don't do it, what I would say is try initially to restrict the number of sources you include, and then over time you can maybe start to expand that and play about with it a little bit. And there are a whole suite of ways that we can share these products as well. So we can share a notebook, and we'll talk a little bit about sharing shortly. And we can share things like the MP3 file or the video file or whatever it is that it's using for us. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to create value from knowledge. So rather than me reading over this slide, I'm just going to leave it on the screen for maybe a minute and give you an opportunity just to have a look at some of these suggestions for how we might create value from knowledge. And then you might start to think about some use cases for NotebookLM ahead of me then doing a live demo of NotebookLM. So hopefully you've maybe picked one or two of those suggestions. We're just going to move on because time is moving on. So as we looked at the anatomy of Gemini, we're going to take a look at the anatomy of NotebookLM, and it does look different. And actually, Notebook as a product is a product that does need a little bit of introduction. Gemini is so easy to use and self-explanatory and so sort of familiar with the general public that lots of people will feel really comfortable diving straight into Gemini. But lots of people will dive into NotebookLM because they've heard someone say how amazing it is, and then they get a little bit overwhelmed and they don't really understand what it is they need to be doing. So it is good, particularly with NotebookLM, just to demonstrate it that first time, because it is so very powerful. That demonstration is really sort of required at the outset of using it. So over on the left-hand side, in the left-hand pane, we have our sources. And again, as we add sources, we can tick and untick them to dictate whether NotebookLM is going to actually be using them to answer the questions in the central pane or in the products in the sources section. And we can also see that if we add a particularly large product, we'll get sort of a spinning wheel next to it to indicate that NotebookLM hasn't yet fully understood that source and it's still looking through it and categorizing it. It's only once you get the checkbox that tells you that actually NotebookLM is finished with its analysis of the source. So we've got our sources pane, and we can add and remove sources at any time. In the central pane, we've got a chat. once it's done some introductory analysis of our sources, it will provide us with a little briefing on them, a little summary, and it might provide us with some starting points, some little questions that we can click on. Do we want it to make us a briefing doc, for example, or do we want to interrogate it in this particular way? We've obviously got a chat window, so we've got the box where we can type at the bottom of that chat pane. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got things that we can make in the studio pane. And we'll take a look at that shortly. Up at the top, we need to give our notebook a name. Now, once it's finished analyzing the sources, if we click up at the top, it will suggest a name for us. So I usually wait until it's finished that initial analysis. And then I probably will edit the suggested title that it's given it. But quite often, it's pretty good at giving it quite a descriptive title. And then over the right-hand side, we have the option to share. Now, I just want to call out that when we share things using NotebookLM, we can only share within the Google domain, the Google tenant that we are acting within. So you can't share with people in other institutions or organizations. That's a very deliberate decision, and it's because NotebookLM is only using the sources that we've given it. So some of those sources might be proprietary information, they might be confidential information, and if we share our notebook externally, we would potentially be opening that information up to the outside world. So you can share internally, but you can't share NotebookLM files made using an education account or a workspace account externally. So just to call that out. And if you do ever at some future point end up in Gemini referencing your NotebookLM files in a gem, you'll also notice that that gem loses the ability to be shared externally, and it's because it's referencing that NotebookLM file. And that, again, is living in accordance with those principles that Google set out many years ago prior to any of this technology being available. And so real thought has gone into this technology. So we've said it becomes this real expert on our trusted information, using all those different products and more to produce some amazing synthesized resources. And so now we're gonna jump into a live demo. So I'm gonna jump across into NotebookLM, and Louise, would you be able to paste into the chat the links to the PDFs for me, please?
Sure.
So the PDFs that we're going to be using today, I've already filed away in my Google Drive, but we will give you in the chat so that you can follow along with me. So when you jump into NotebookLM, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to click Create New Notebook. At this point, I'm just going to pause because I'm going to give you an opportunity to grab those files from the chat. So it's 3 PDF files. So if you go ahead and save them into your Google Drive or save them into your downloads folder, you're then going to be able to follow along and make the same notebook I'm making, because obviously I can't share my notebook with you because of those sharing restrictions that we've already talked about. So this is what I mean about this user interface. Before you can do anything, it won't let me type anything in the chat because I haven't given it any sources. Copy text can be a source, websites and YouTube videos. We can upload files from a computer, or we can access our Google Drive. So I'm going to dive into my Google Drive, and I'm going to go and find the 3 PDF files that we are talking about. So these here, and you can see that I can multi-select, and I'm going to insert those. Now, these spinning wheels here indicate to me the NotebookLM is still analyzing these files. And the fact that nothing has appeared yet in this central pane tells me that it hasn't yet finished. You can see it's done 2 of them now. It's just finishing up on the 3rd. The 2 that it has already done will likely be the shortest of the PDFs, or the least complicated. And it's now finished all 3. And you can see actually it's automatically named the notebook for me. So when I click up here, I can change it, but I might not need to. Okay, so I'm just going to put the words demo at the start of this one so that I remember later on when I'm going through my notebook files that I was using this one to demonstrate something. So we've got these 3 sources over in the left-hand pane. We've got our chat pane in the middle, and you can see that it's given me a nice summary here, and then it's given me some suggested questions that might get me started in terms of interrogating this information. So I'm going to go ahead and click into that. Whilst it's doing that, if you do choose to share this notebook with anybody, you will then have access to analytics. So you'll be able to see usage. So you'll be able to see how many queries were asked, how many people were interrogating the notebook file, things like that. So you do get some insight into what people are doing off the back of it. And so we've got this amazing question: what are the common principles shared by the global AI guidelines? So it's gone across the 3 global AI guidelines. It's completed a meta-analysis, again, only of these documents. It's reporting back, and look, it's citing for me as well. And I can click through and view the source, and it finds exactly and scrolls all the way down to exactly where it is in that source. So it's really, really quick and easy for me to verify, just in case I wanted to make sure. And again, because NotebookLM is solely grounded in the sources, I'm not going to say that it can't get things wrong. It certainly still can, but it's far less likely to get things wrong because it's restricted in the sources that you give it. And it is far more likely to say, I don't know, because it's not in the sources, than Gemini. Gemini will always try and help you out. So, in true demonstration fashion, what I've also got are some studio products that I produced earlier. Before I show you the ones that I produced earlier, and I'm going to demonstrate something that is fraught with danger, because it usually goes wrong, but the interactive podcast is really, really cool to demo. So I'm going to try and demo it, but if it doesn't work, you have to take my assurance it does normally work. Each of these products, when you click the arrow, you can then select the format. Now, if you want to particularly use the interactive podcast, you need to leave it on the defaults, because if you start to customize it, the interactivity option is lost. But you can then put in your own prompt and really sort of focus it in exactly on what you want it to produce. And you can control the language and the format and the length. Same with the slide deck. You can control what it is you're looking for. Are you looking for really, really quite graphic design heavy slides, or are you looking for something where it's more sort of bullet points and you're going to then talk through them? With our videos, we can control, again, we've got our prompt box, but we can control the format, whether it's cinematic, an explainer, or a nice little brief bite-sized overview. And then if we select some of them, we then get a visual style, and we can choose that visual style. Now, one thing I have noticed is that some of these visual styles on the products, particularly with things like the infographics, are still rolling out. So if you don't get the visual styles in your NotebookLM, they will eventually appear. But if you don't get them, in the prompt box, you can say, using the whiteboard style, and it will apply the style, even though you don't get the click option in the graphic user interface. In terms of customizing the mind map, I think this is new. I didn't see this one before, but again, you can prompt the mind map to go into a particular area.
The people have been asking for this customization, so it's come, so it's good. This is one of my favorite tools.
I've honestly never known Google iterate products as quickly as they are right now. I've been someone who's always provided feedback to Google for Education over probably the last decade plus, and eventually a lot of the things I wanted appeared. It's amazing actually just how quickly stuff's appearing right now. Louise is absolutely right. People have wanted a lot of this control for a long time, so it's amazing that it's now there. Reports is a funny one because it actually hides an awful lot of functionality behind a single button. So things like blog posts and briefing docs and things like that. And it will also eventually load in some suggestions based on the kind of content that we've got. Flashcards, really cool. So again, if there's key terminology that we want to engage with, we can use flashcards, and we can click the card and it'll spin round and it'll give us the definition behind the phrase or the word. Again, if we're wanting to learn content, a little quiz, and we can, again, use some of these suggestions in the prompt, or we can write our own prompt completely. And if we're feeling like we want a real challenge today, we can make it really, really tough. Or if we're not having such a good day, perhaps the easy option's better. My personal favorite is the infographic. And again, if you don't get these visual styles, you can prompt to have them, but they should be appearing pretty imminently if you don't have them. And just because I wish I'd had technology like this available to me towards the even sort of the end of my career teaching in the state sector in the UK, graphic organizers became really, really popular. And whilst I quite liked the idea of having them, I'm not particularly great at making things look attractive and interesting in that sort of graphic format. Whereas if I could have done it using something like NotebookLM, I think I would have been able to produce some far more effective graphic organizers than I ended up producing, because they were a little bit basic and boring. And then finally, again, if you're providing it with lots and lots of data that you wanted to summarize, you might choose to drop in with a data table, and it will synthesize the data across them all. So just to demonstrate this idea of the podcast, I'm going to attempt to play the audio. Do just give me a thumbs up if it's actually playing. Louise, are you hearing the audio from?
I'm not hearing the audio, no.
And this is why live demos are fraught with danger. Let me see what I can do to fix that. Refreshing the tab fixes all problems. Anything? No. Okay. Sadly, that's not going to work today. But what it does is it provides you with a podcast of two people speaking. There are more voices yet to come. It is the same voices, an American male voice and an American female voice. But the nature of it is that most podcasts are a discussion between multiple people. So it wanted to provide that kind of feel to it by having the two independent voices. What I wanted to demonstrate was the interactive mode. And so I'll just explain what the interactive mode is, because it doesn't appear to want to do it right now. The interactive mode will handle you as like a caller into a radio program. So when you push the interactive button, the interface changes, you play the podcast, and then you can go ahead and hit join. And when you do join it, they stop what they're doing and they say, oh, we've got a caller on the line. What is it you'd like to say? And then you can, again, just talk to it and say, have you considered this? They'll always do the typically sort of, oh, amazing input. Yes, that's a really interesting point. We must consider that. And then they will spend the next few moments diving into that sort of subtopic that you've pushed them into, before then returning back to the podcast flow as it was going to be. So again, in terms of summarizing a document and being able to engage with it on the go, a really, really useful form of interrogating the document. And similarly, producing the video output. So when you're looking at these, if you can't tell what they are, the icons match to the studio pane above. So I know this one is a video because it's got that green play button in the middle of the rectangle. So if I go ahead and click into it, you may not get the sound again, but you will get the video from that. Let's have a look. Let's see if I can get this. I think I know where I've gone wrong here. It's come back out, hasn't it?
Secondary and higher education students are adopting generative AI at a staggering pace. In a matter of months, chatbots transitioned from novelties to ubiquitous tools in dorm rooms and study halls globally.
So again, rather than just having the podcast format, it's going to provide us with some nice graphics behind that. Let's see if the podcast now works. Let's give it a go. Where are we? Right.
Cannot see.
Interactive mode.
Picture this scenario. You're sitting at your desk.
You hearing it?
Right? Staring at a completely blank screen.
Oh, we have all been there.
Or maybe you're wrestling with this really complex problem that you just, cannot seem to crack. The cursor is just blinking relent. Oh, our listeners got something to share. Let's hear it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what the documents say about human-centered approaches, please?
That is a perfect transition because human-centered design is actually the heartbeat of this entire OECD report.
It really is. You're talking about shifting the focus from just what the tech can do to what humans need.
Exactly. The report defines human-centered design as placing people's needs, values.
So as you can see, it really nicely adapts. And again, in terms of providing this to other users, them being able to engage with the content in a variety of different modalities allows them to really have that level of both, yes, accessibility, but also usability. And depending on if they're sort of on the go, they may engage with it using headphones and talking to it. And then when they're sitting at a desk, they might engage with it slightly differently. But really, really powerful in terms of being able to engage with the content. We know it can make us slide decks. Again, I chose the default. One of the things about the slide decks is you can make changes to them, but you need to make changes to them in NotebookLM using this revision option, this pencil icon, and you kind of queue them up. So you go through the slides, you say what you want it to change, and then you go ahead and click generate. And then you possibly go and do something else whilst it runs. And when you come back, it will make all of those changes for you, and then you can export them in whatever format's relevant for you. So that you can use them elsewhere. The infographic option is probably my favorite one for really cleanly summarizing information. I would love to say that I could have produced something like this using my amazing artistic skills. I have to be honest and tell you that I couldn't produce anything that looked anywhere close to the quality of this. I think it's engaging. I think it does a really good job of summarizing the key points. And again, if it hadn't quite hit the mark, I can actually do another one. But when I create my second one, in the prompt, I can start to provide it with some things that I need it to consider that it hadn't considered. And so I can sort of nudge it in the right direction. So again, in terms of what it can produce, really, really wonderful. And then I think what becomes everyone's favorite, even though it's not quite as whiz bang, is the mind map. Now, I'm just going to expand the mind map. So what the mind map does is it takes the documents and it tries to identify the main themes in those documents. And I can expand those themes by clicking on the arrows. Oh, that one doesn't, there we go. And then, again, if there is an arrow pointing away from it, there are still more subtopics that I can dig into. And then if I think, okay, well, yeah, I want to think about the augmentation paradigm, I can click on it. And what it does is it then drops a prompt into this chat window here in the middle of my screen. And it starts to have a discussion about augmentation paradigms. You can see it's taking a little bit of time. It's got to go through all of these sources to be able to do this. It's telling me what it's doing, and then it's going to provide me with an answer. Again, grounded in the sources, it's showing me with the citations where it's found that information, and I can click through and verify them. But in terms of being able to understand at a very high level and then drill down into the key sub-context of the documents, mind map, whilst not being as whiz-bang as the infographics or the videos or the interactive podcasts, which are amazing, actually, in terms of being able to engage with the content really quickly, it's really, really powerful. So those mind maps, really, really useful. We know that we've got some sharing settings, and that when you do share with somebody, you can control whether they are a viewer or an editor. So if they're a viewer, all they can do is engage with what you've produced. So if you've produced some things in this studio panel, they'll have access to them, but they can't produce any more or change any. and they won't be able to change. They won't be able to change any of the sources. If they're an editor, obviously they get the same interface that you, the creator, has got, and they can make changes to that notebook file. And you can share that by either notifying them or copying the link and sending it to them in whichever app you use to message them. And then obviously you've got analytics if it is shared off the back of that. So I think that now is leading us back to the slide deck for some discussion questions, just as we are thinking about wrapping up, Louise.
Yeah, and then just the gem at the end, the critical gem that we can give you. So our head of research, Dr. Laura White, has built a gem to behave as a very critical reviewer. So it's going to critique whatever you put into it very heavily. But just to show you again, for that sort of research life cycle, you can utilize gems as well within Gemini to sort of help and support that process.
There we go. So gems are safe prompts. The link to that gem is in the chat pane right now. So the beauty of saving a prompt is that if you find something that's really, really effective, you can not only use it yourself, but you can share it with others. And when you're using gems for research, you can share them out. You can add in various different files and sources, and then colleagues or students can make use of them and interact with those sources. So if you find that you've got one that works really, really well for you, it will probably work really well for others. And one of the things I quite like about gems is that when you're creating a gem, the first time you write the instructions, you get this little icon here. And what it does is it takes your starting point prompt and it uses Gemini to improve on it. And then you can edit it. So if you haven't given it enough detail, it will add in some detail for you. And then you can say, okay, this is what it would like in terms of structure. It's not quite got it right. It's not quite got the audience right or the theme right. I can adjust that, but I can see really what a good prompt would look like within this context, within this theme. And then you can start to make changes to it. And gems can be shared more widely, provided that one of their knowledge files isn't a NotebookLM notebook, because that will restrict the sharing on them. So obviously we've, through Dr. Laura White, we've created this gem, which we've shared with you, which you should be able to access using the link in the chat. So that's gems.
We've also provided the prompt for that instruction for that gem as well, if you want to take that away and build it for yourself as well. But it's useful just to see how that would work in that process, in case you don't want to put your own data into Dr. Laura's gem that she has made. So you can take the instruction away. Steve, would you be able to just get a gem on the screen just to show how it works when you're building one? Because it's quite
so
seamless.
I've got lots and lots of gems. So to access this menu, if it isn't expanded already, it's just at the top left where there's 3 lines. You click it and you click into gems. In gems, you just go to new gem. You give it a title. You don't have to give it a description, but it's a good idea if you do, because when you're sharing it, all the end user will see is the name and the description. The instructions are kind of hidden behind the scenes. And then you give it your instructions, and you can use this Gemini enhancement button. You can tell it a default. So if you always want it to respond by creating an image, you can set Nano Banana to be turned on, or you might want Canvas to be turned on, which gives you the ability to edit the output and easier access in terms of copying and pasting the content. And then you can provide files for it to reference. And as we said before, all kinds of different files. But if you want to make use of NotebookLM, which can be quite powerful, it will then restrict who you can share it with. And once you have produced this, I'll go to one that I've already got, you can still go back and edit it. So I can click into one of these here, and you see this one's quite detailed. I can go in and edit it and make changes to it. Or alternatively, I can hit the share button, and then it's going to, in a minute, hopefully pop up with my share in context. And I can either share it with individual people, or I can choose perhaps that I want anyone with the link to be able to access it if I want to share it outside of my organization. And then I can copy that link and send it out.
We are nearly at time, and I'm conscious I don't want to run over, and I want to keep this on time. So Steve, would you be able to get the slides back up and just go to slide 71? That would be great, please. So if you want to do more learning in regards to this, there are lots and lots of things you can do. I would highly recommend certification for faculty if you're within a higher ed context, and it's really great, and it's good for just like further learning and things like that. If anyone's got any questions, start putting them in the chat now, so we will do our best to sort of answer them in the last sort of 3 minutes that we've got. But also, if you want to learn more about Google AI, all of these links will take you to different platforms. I really like trying out labs. It's actually really fun. There's a great one on there at the moment where you have to try and prompt the image that it's giving you, so you have to try and recreate that image by prompting, thinking about what a good prompt would be. So that slide Steve showed you earlier on prompting images, that's a really nice one. It's also a great little AI literacy activity as well. But there's lots and lots of resources if you want to know more about Google's AI tools, and lots of things you can do to try it within your classroom or your lecture theatre. I think sometimes after these sessions it can be really overwhelming because we have shown you so many things, and I always think one thing to do is just to take 1 or 2 things that you can start doing immediately, and then thinking more long term, because we show you a lot in these sessions and it can be a lot to sort of take away. But hopefully we've given you a lot of resources and lots of things to go and experiment with post this event. If you could give us some feedback, that would be wonderful. We would really appreciate it. And also, don't forget, you can get your certificate of attendance as well. So if anyone has any questions, we have 2 minutes. I know that's not that long, but we will do our best to answer those questions for you. So please do ask away. I'm going to put the link in the chat for that feedback form again, so bear with me. Okay, if no one's got any questions, there have been lots of questions throughout this. Hopefully we've not missed any, but if you have and you want to chat to us, you can get to us through email. I'm sure if you just look for us on the line, you'll find it, but it's Louise at canopy.education or Steve at canopy.education. If you want to reach out, we'd be more than happy to chat. Thank you so much, Steve. That was wonderful, wonderful demos. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone. We'll get some t-shirts made, Kev, just for you. Take care, Kev. Right, we're 1 minute over, so I'm going to close the call now. Thank you so much, everyone. You'll be able to access all of these resources post the event. So thank you so much. Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Steve.